Once known as thought-provoking bastions of free speech where anyone's ideas could be challenged, many university campuses have become the exact opposite. Academic freedom is under scrutiny these days. Well, our next guest has faced this head on and was recently attacked on a university campus in Manitoba. Dr. Frances Widdowson joins us from Calgary. She's a former Mount Royal University political science professor. Dr. Widdowson, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
Okay, this isn't the first time that you were attacked or even swarmed on a university campus. Um, your your name, just for the past couple of years, has had sort of a negative connotation attached to it. I think people you've become known as a residential school denier. How did all of that start? I mean, that almost suggests that you deny that residential schools existed or that there was anything bad going on there, but you never actually said that there were negative atrocities that happened there. How did this all start?
Well, the term residential school denier is an obvious kind of linguistic ploy, because what they actually mean, which they do not say, is that you deny that the residential schools were genocidal. So that's really the issue. Or you deny that the remains of 215 children have been found at the Kamloops, the former Kamloops Indian residential school. So they're not clear as to what they mean, and that allows them to cast aspersions against you for, sort of unknown reasons. So I think it's a deliberate tactic. But if we're going to say that the residential school denier is someone who denies that the remains of 215 children have been found, or you deny the residential schools are genocidal, then I am a residential school denier. But that term was coined by the scholar activist Sean Carlton, who resides at the University of Manitoba, and he considers himself to be a residential school denialism expert, and he is a serious bad actor, and he is doing all he can to intimidate people and to stop them from discussing the Kamloops case, which is the major issue that is before us. We need truth about Kamloops.
Okay, and you're saying because no graves have ever been, or no bodies, you're saying,
There's
have
no
ever been found.
evidence of remains, and we do not have evidence of even one child who has been reported missing from that school. So if there are hundreds of remains, which is, it takes a lot of work to bury 100 or 200 bodies, who are those children? Who are the children? And it's very, very likely it's just misremembering from these people they call knowledge keepers, or confirmation bias, or just they believe it for some strange reason that we don't really know. So this issue is the issue, and we need truth on this issue, and we're not getting it because people like Sean Carlton are, basically trying to delegitimize anyone who tries to make that argument.
Have there been remains found at any of the schools, the residential schools in question?
There remains in cemeteries. So this is a big confusion as well, which is put forward by Carlton and Negon Sinclair. Those are the main figures in this kind of misinformation that's being put forward by them. There are many, many graves that are now unmarked in cemeteries at a number of schools. And that's what's meant by missing children, is that Kimberly Murray, the special interlocutor, said the children aren't missing, they're buried in cemeteries. And there's many children who were buried. They had marked graves to begin with, but they were wooden crosses, so those markers have deteriorated. So the relatives don't know where exactly in the cemetery their relative is buried, or sometimes it's just an abandoned cemetery and it's like a grassy patch next to the Gardner Expressway, which is the case of Tanya Talaga's great grandmother or grandmother. She's the supposed journalist from the Globe and Mail who's Annie, who is her relative, died at an asylum that wasn't a residential school, but now is in a abandoned cemetery, and they don't they found the grassy patch where she's buried, Annie.
Mm. How do you respond to accusations of being called a residential school denialist or a white supremacist?
Well,
You've been called
that's a
that
very
as
different
well.
thing. White
Yes.
supremacist is a very different thing than a I am a residential school denialist if the definition is that I deny the residential schools are genocidal, because I don't agree that the residential schools meet the threshold of what is considered to be genocide by the United Nations Convention on Genocide. So that is intention to destroy and an ethnic group, and the the Canadian state was not trying to destroy Aboriginal people. It was trying to incorporate them, assimilate them into Canadian society, and people were Christians at that time, so they wanted them to be Christians just like everyone else, just like anyone. They thought that was saving souls. So that's not trying to destroy anyone. The white supremacist, I'm a socialist. I'm an atheist. I have nothing to do with it. That's just a smear. I would say defamatory, definitely defamatory, but that's another issue. That's another defamatory claim. But residential school denialism depends upon the definition that one's going to use.
And you've never said that any Indigenous person, that some of them didn't have horrible experiences there.
Yeah, it's, people have horrible experiences in many school settings. There's, this still has to be worked out as to what the extent of this was. There have been people convicted for sexual abuse of various kinds. It was known that corporal punishment was very severe at times. There were this poor ventilation that existed that Peter Bryce had documented, and sort of poor conditions. But the government did debate Bryce's report in Parliament. They did make some changes. Now you could say that wasn't enough. There wasn't enough resources that were spent, but this was a time of scarcity as well, one has to consider. So money that would have been allocated to the residential schools would have been not allocated to some other serious problem that was unfolding at the time. So, these things all need to be discussed academically, but you can't discuss them at all in the universities, as we discovered at the University of Winnipeg. It's not possible anymore because people say you've got to believe the survivors, and if you don't accept everything they say, you'll be assaulted. That's basically what's happening now. It's quite a shocking situation, which is, rapidly escalating to unbelievable proportions, as we saw last week.
Yeah, yeah. As you just mentioned there, so you were recently verbally and physically assaulted at the University of Winnipeg. So, what was the context behind that? What took place exactly?
I'm still having a hard time believing and I've got the footage now. We have tons of footage, not just from us, but from the people who are proud of themselves and were posting all their abuse on the internet. So I went with my videographer, Daniel Page, who's a computer science professor. He's a really, really nice, mild-mannered guy, would never hurt anyone. And as we arrive, and we are going to be discussing the claim, residential school denialism, in quotation marks, is a barrier to reconciliation. And the reason why we chose that claim was because Negon Sinclair was making that claim at an event a couple of hours earlier with the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. So it was Negon Sinclair's claim that we were going to be discussing. Anyway, these activists and their gangster associates, that was the scary thing, as there's a number of Aboriginal gangsters there. They did not want me on campus, and they were telling me I could not be there. And I said, I have heard an email this morning from the provost which says that I will be allowed to do this and no one will block me, so I am entitled to be here just like everyone else. I tried to I was doing spectrum street epistemology on this claim, which is a method which has been developed by Peter Boghossian, who was a philosophy professor from Portland State, who was pushed out of that university. It's a wonderful method because it's not about you're wrong, you're right. It's not like an argument like that. It's like, here's a claim. What's the evidence that you have for this claim? And you have these mats, these 7 mats going from strongly agree to strongly disagree. It's a wonderful method for universities to think about the evidence that you're using and the level of certainty that you have for your claim. And as I tried to lay out my mats, all these people had stole them and vandalized them, and there was huge just mayhem. And my poor videographer Daniel Page was had a bunch of gangsters roughing him up and pushed him off campus, and he feared for his life that day. Like I was dealing with all these cry bullies, so I tend to just see it as a bunch of people just venting their emotions, which is better than not people not. But um, anyway, he was pushed off. He was fearful. He thought he was going to get stabbed. I didn't know this because I was dealing with my own situation, and people got angrier and angrier and angrier. Security did nothing. We called for the police. The police never arrived. And eventually, these women became so angry, 6 women, and I know who 2 of them are. I know 3 of them are. I'm filing a police report tomorrow on this. They encircled me with their arms linked and tried to push me off campus. And I sat down. I just sat down. And that
Oh my.
stymied them. That seriously stymied them because they poured pop over my head, and then they ruined my sound system later on. And Daniel got punched in the face by an irate Aboriginal man. It was just
Oh boy.
complete chaos. It was just, and of
Mhm.
course the University of Winnipeg was is got serious reputational problems now because of this, because we have all
Oh,
this footage that we are going to be releasing over the next few weeks. And
interesting.
what a disaster.
Okay. Something similar happened to you, not quite on that level, but at the University of Lethbridge, you got swarmed. When was that? A few years back, and I believe you filed a lawsuit against the university, right? And you recently lost that case before Alberta Court of Appeal, challenging the safe space provisions in Alberta's Occupational Health and Safety Act. So that stems. It was 2023, a 2023 lecture about wokeism at the U of L that was ultimately canceled. Um, what were you asking the court in that appeal or in that
So
case?
so we haven't lost the case. It should be it's when so this is what happens, and this is the problem with the legal system. Well, I guess we need to get these things sorted out. So the case is being put forth by Jonah Pickle, who was a student at the time, and myself, that our charter rights were violated. Myself because I was not able to speak, and Jonah Pickle because he was not able to hear the talk. That's going forward next year, so that's going ahead. But in the process of trying to argue that position that our charter rights were violated, we came up against the Occupational Health and Safety Act, because that has all sorts of claims about you've got to provide a psychological, not just a physically safe workplace, but you've got to provide a psychologically safe workplace. And of course, in a university, you're going to have all sorts of contentious discussions going on. So that's not going to be very good for academic freedom and freedom of expression to have these kinds of stipulations about psychological safety. So, as a result of that, the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, my lawyer who's associated with them, they argued that that was unconstitutional and a violation of charter rights. And we lost that at the Court of Appeal. And that, I don't know if that's going to be appealed further up the line. They're working on it, the Justice Center. So it hasn't really been decided what's going to happen. But in the background is the actual case that is still going forward. It just has all these other details that are being argued at this time before we get to that case.
But have you not tried to have dialogue or conversations with like Indigenous elders to see eye to eye? And
Yeah, I'm doing with that with the spectrum speed epistemology. And we almost got it done at the University of Winnipeg. I talked to an Aboriginal man, sweet man, at University of Manitoba. I did it with Aaron Pete on his podcast. We did a bit of spectrum speed epistemology to sort of see where we're both coming from. So it's a way of trying to figure out what the evidence is, or maybe you have some definitional problems, and you can move closer together. And even if you don't, you can understand more about why people believe the things that they do.
Thanks so much for being with us today, Dr. Widdowson.
Yep.
Yep, great to have you on. Frances Widdowson is a political science professor, and she joined us today from Calgary.